This is a panel discussion with the editors of Collective Intelligence, the journal. We have Jessica Flack, Panos Epirotis, Jeff Mulgan, Tom Malone, and Scott Page, and we'll be talking to them about the ambitions for the journal and what they're excited about in Collective Intelligence. So first of all, I just want to ask you all, why a journal about collective intelligence? Why is this important? And I guess why now?
Well, I think the question of why you need a journal is that in any case, whether it's this field or any other field, I think it's a good idea to have a new journal when there's a community of people doing related work who don't have a better place to share their ideas. In this case, we did already have a conference, as you said, but I think there are clearly kind of ways of sharing ideas in journals that are better for many purposes than just sharing them in conferences. So I think after, as you said, almost 10 years of building a community through the conference, it seemed to me that it was clearly a good idea to have a real journal in this field as well. And I think there are at least two reasons why you might want to have a new community talking to each other, not only in conferences, but in journals. The first is when common problems occur in multiple existing fields, but when the commonalities among those problems are not widely recognized. The second reason why you might want to have a new field, whether it's in a journal or a conference, is when there are new phenomena to study. And I think both of those things are certainly true in the field of collective intelligence. I think there are lots of different fields that are all tackling similar problems, but not talking much to each other about them. Computer science, biology, economics, psychology, sociology, lots of other fields are all talking about similar problems. So I think that's one important reason why we need not only a conference, but also a journal. And I think there are also new phenomena involving collective intelligence that are becoming increasingly important, especially, I think, those that arise from combining groups of people and computers in new ways. So fortunately, there's now a growing community of people who realize that these things are happening and who want to talk to each other about them. And this journal is a place for them to do that. I also hope that the journal itself, its very existence, will help this community and this new academic field of research grow substantially over time.
So we've heard that there's a very ambitious disciplinary breadth to this journal. And of course, one of the things that you're trying to do is to bring these different communities of people from different disciplines together. That I imagine is quite a daunting and challenging task as a group of editors. And so how do you plan to overcome maybe some of the differences in vocabulary or frameworks and methods? How are you going to, how is the journal and you as editors, how will you help the field find that shared and common understanding? Is that even necessary? Scott, maybe could you give us the first answer here?
I think this is where it's going to require a lot of work on the part of us as editors. I think one thing we're doing to ensure that articles can be understood by a variety of people is not sending articles to people, sending articles to editors who aren't necessarily in someone's field. So if somebody submits a paper and it's about collective intelligence in markets, we may send that to a physicist and a biologist who've got sort of a general interest in this, who can sort of, strip away the jargon and really focus on what the key ideas are. So our first approach is, again, just, using the diversity of our editors as a first filter. And then I think the second, as the main editors, we're just going to have to, look at each paper very carefully and ask, is this written in a way that it's going to engage, a broader audience? And is there jargon that's getting in the way? And we spoke about this earlier today, that there's some really interesting ideas that once they get put in a disciplinary journal, it's almost like all the life and energy gets stripped away from them because it gets, caught up in sort of like jargon, technique, methodology fit within the literature, as opposed to just sort of a celebration of the idea. And I think we really want to focus on kind of the celebration of the idea and the theory and the development of a community. and stay away from sort of like narrowing, sort of the narrow lane of disciplinary research.
I love the idea of celebrating the field and really foregrounding that. Panos, what are the topics that you're most excited about publishing over the next 2 to 3 years in the first years of the journal's existence? What do you think is the cutting edge of collective intelligence?
I think for me, one of the exciting things is the fact that we have effectively AI systems, deployed throughout the world, and fundamentally, these systems are powered by people, are powered by human behavior, are powered by actions that we are capturing and feeding to this system. When you are just going to Google and you're trying to type a query and you get this autocomplete, this is fundamental collective intelligence that Google has aggregated behavior of many people that are using Google, and it gives you back something that seems very, very intelligent. Now, this happens throughout. There is no AI system that is not working with humans in the loop today. All the systems seem to be completely automated, but one way or another, they are interacting with humans in a very collective fashion. And there is this symbiotic interaction of artificial intelligence and human intelligence coming together. And I think the systems are very, very, very primitive at this point. So once we get into more intelligent structures of how AI systems can share knowledge with each other, how they can interact in better ways with humans to improve faster and so on, we're going to see a lot of interesting developments happening in the next few years in that front.
And Jeff, would you agree with that? Do you have the same vision for the cutting edge of collective intelligence?
I certainly think the interaction of artificial and human intelligence at scale is a great topic where no one knows the answers yet. But I think there's also a bigger reason why we're doing this journal now, which maybe points to some of the cutting edges. We're only one generation into the internet being part of everyone's life, and the internet is an extraordinary tool for organizing intelligence at far larger scale than ever before. And yet, in many of our systems, we've seen more collective stupidity rather than intelligence, often in politics, in markets, in the environment, in media. And it's become very clear we lack good theories for understanding why that was the case, why many of the hopes of 10 or 20 years ago turned out to be wrong. And we need both a theory and a practice to help us fix this. So I think some of the cutting edges are to be found in the places which are using internet and AI technologies, plus human beings, to create genuine collective intelligence in companies, in the reinvention of democracy. In the last 12 months around COVID, the extraordinary invention of new structures linking doctors around the world, for example, or the science system, all these gives us clues to how we can fix some of the rather serious problems of collective stupidity we have around us, and how we can then mobilize AI to really solve problems and not, as has sometimes been the case, to actually be a creator of even more new problems.
And Tom, I can see that you want to come in here as well.
Yeah, one of the things I'm most excited about is the potential for exploring connections among what different disciplines know about the basic processes that occur in all collectively intelligent systems. I completely agree with what Panos and Jeff just said, but I think there's also an exciting theoretical potential for understanding what happens when a group of actors act intelligently together. For instance, any collectively intelligent system, whether it's a group of people or of computers or of fish, has to somehow sense the environment, make decisions, learn from experience, allocate tasks, and a bunch of other things. So even though they haven't talked to each other much about it, there are a lot of different disciplines that have studied different ways of doing these exact things. For instance, economists have studied how group decisions can be made by markets. Political scientists have studied how group decisions can be made by voting. Biologists have studied how they can be made by a kind of informal consensus among animals like ants or fish. So I think there's a huge potential for developing an integrated body of knowledge about different ways these basic processes can be done in groups and the relative advantages and disadvantages of each of the different ways. And to the point Jeff was making, I think deeper understanding of these basic possibilities can help us address some of our most important societal problems: climate change, pandemics, democracy, and lots of others.
Scott, I know that you also wanted to contribute to this one. Go ahead.
When you think about the potential here, it's amazing. 20, 30 years ago, when someone went to college, we would say to them, this is your one moment to have access to the world's knowledge at this giant library. And then you're going to be off somewhere and you won't be connected to it. Now, we have everything the world knows at our fingertips in our phones. Appliances are smart. So there's all these sources of information and intelligence that exist that didn't exist 20 years ago. And as Jeff mentioned, we're not there yet. We haven't figured out how do we construct intelligent systems. We really are at this time where sort of information becomes this, sort of the key property, the key thing that we're trying to sort of think, how do we leverage to make our lives better? And as Tom and Jeff both hinted at, and I think it's just so fascinating here, is that do the current set of institutions we have, the set of markets, democratic institutions, hierarchies, are they constructed for a world with intelligent people and intelligent machines so that we really can collectively just, sort of live better lives, sustain the, environment better, just, solve the world's problems, that sort of thing. And I think that there's just a lot of big, wide open, interesting questions that we can get at in this journal that don't fit within a standard discipline.
Jessica, would you agree with that as well? And maybe you can also tell us a little bit about the different formats of the journal, so that we can encourage the bringing together of all of these big important topics.
Okay, let me divide that in two and just follow up on Jeff and Tom and Scott there and Panos. With respect to cutting edge collective intelligence problems, this is going to be the age of information, and understanding how opinions and the perspectives of components are integrated to produce a group output is a key question. And we have, despite the fact there is a history of work on collective intelligence, we have very little sophisticated understanding of this. Another way of putting this is, if you want to make it much more concrete, think about basketball, is a great team performance more than the sum of its parts? So the sum is a very simple aggregation, right? And the challenges we have in answering this question come from two biases. One is a bias for parsimony, so we want simple answers, and the other is a bias called the McNamara fallacy, and it basically says that what we can't see doesn't exist. And so how does this touch on collective intelligence? Well, one of the first things that I think we really need to hammer on is our group's not just about the sum of the contributions of outstanding players, but the consequence of interesting synergistic interactions. Synergistic interactions meaning that say like Scott, Tom, and I produce some output. The output cannot be decomposed into my contribution, into Tom's contribution, into Scott's. We make, in the nice sense, we make each other better by working together in a way that's not the consequence of something, an additive process. And so understanding the role of synergistic interactions in collective intelligence is I think very exciting, and we're in a position to do this now. We weren't so much in a position to do it before because we didn't have the data. It comes back to data again. We have microscopic data on individual interactions that make possible, really for the first time, answering these kinds of questions. And it will also touch on many other aspects of collective intelligence, like developing better algorithms for integrating information. So Google PageRank is a very simple example of an algorithm that determines Google used to use to rank websites. And the sort of algorithms that are used in the computer science community are somewhat more sophisticated, but a lot of the algorithms for combining information, for combining the opinions of the actors in the rest of the collective intelligence community are still fairly naive, let's say, and not based on an understanding of what's actually happening in these systems. But with this microscopic data, we're in a position to interrogate these systems and ask what algorithms are being used in, say, systems biology, in molecular processes, in neuroscience to do this integration. And combining that with the synergistic perspective, super exciting. Just again, to make that more concrete, just think of the crazy circuits that you observe to describe metabolism or how the brain works. right? They're incredibly elaborate and they involve higher order interactions, these synergies. But we're just now, with that microscopic data and new mathematical techniques coming out of information theory, in a position to really address whether the group performance, the output of these circuits, the output of a basketball team is more than the sum of the parts. Oh, and with respect to your second question, Alex, in terms of the journal, how the journal is going to sort of push these ideas forward. I think a number of ways. Scott mentioned several of them already in terms of our reviewing philosophy and sending papers out to reviewers who are not necessarily experts in the area that the authors are publishing or have written, done their research in, but are adjacent to it, so they have sort of a broader perspective. But there's several other things we're doing as well, and the sort of bigger picture on that is making the journal. Journals are this kind of static thing, this archival thing where you store research, and I think in the future there's going to need to be a lot more fluidity, more interaction with the community, more updating in real time, more discussion of results and community building around those results, and not just the paper that sits untouched and sort of cited maybe, but more back and forth. So to build that into the journal, we have different types of papers, like comments that people can make on research articles, constructive comments. We're asking for perspectives and reviews and syntheses, which you see in other journals. We're also going to have something that's sort of unusual called a debate. And in the debate, we'll choose a topic as the editors for a debate, and we'll pick people from different sort of sides on that debate to exchange as what we're calling a series of letters that will be published. The letters are like 1 to 2 pages in length. And the first one we hope will be on noise, the constructive role of noise in collective intelligence and the cost of noise. And so in that way, get discussion going between different research groups, but also then open it up to the community to comment. And then just a small thing that I think could make a big difference, and we just don't see enough in research articles, is to have tables for modeling and theory papers in which parameters and variables and constraints are explained in mathematical terms and also in natural language. And this kind of small thing will facilitate reading of these papers by people in very different fields. So attending to details like that, in addition to the big picture, to really, get engagement up is one of our motivations and one of our goals.
I'm really interested in hearing about the kind of variety of different contributions you're seeking and how that can help to stimulate, attracting different types of audiences to the journal as well. You mentioned debates, for example, and I know you have case studies for practitioners and even speculative fiction. I mean, this sounds almost not like an academic journal, and I think potentially could attract practitioners. But what is the incentive for them to be a part of this community? Because they don't have the kind of academic structures around them that would otherwise maybe allow for them to participate in the kind of theoretical development of the field. Maybe Jeff, could you give the first answer here?
Well, maybe I'll start with picking up on one of the things Jessica said. So some of the people here have written in the past about the hierarchy, which takes you from data to information to knowledge and wisdom. And in many fields, we're awash with data. Sometimes that leads to knowledge and wisdom, but not always. And so a key theoretical issue for many, many fields is to better understand how one leads to another. Normally, as Jessica said, that requires integration of multiple kinds of data, multiple models, multiple kinds of knowledge, and a synthetic integrative intelligence. Now, it turns out that it's not only very hard for algorithms to do, it's very untheorized in almost all of the social sciences as well. And yet it's a practical challenge. For example, if you're trying to respond to a pandemic, which has a health, an economic, a social, a psychological dimension. If you want to solve climate change, which operates on all these different dimensions. So almost all the big issues of practice and challenge actually require attending to these, some of these deeply theoretical questions. And sometimes the practitioners who are trying to solve these things are, I think, ahead of the theorists, because they've had to, as it were, invent solutions. And part of the job then of the theorist is to make sense of what's being done. So we hope in the journal we will have case studies which have deep implications for different fields, but in some ways to then stimulate the theorists, the researchers, to think more deeply about what really works in the real world.
Yeah, and Jessica, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I want to make a comment. So, science, unfortunately, has become very anti-intellectual. There, especially in the biological sciences. I mean, maybe somewhat less so in the social sciences, and yet now there's this new field called the science of science that looks at how good science gets produced and in the collective intelligence role in that. And one of the results that we're seeing in papers on this topic is that some of the best papers by, say, some Nobel laureates, not only do their citation, the papers they cite in their reference section look different than the reference sections of many other researchers. They tend to be much broader. These Nobel laureates are citing from adjacent fields, not just their own field, which is so interesting. But these people also have, they tend to pursue creative endeavors outside of science. And they're big readers of, fiction as well as nonfiction. And so I think, one of the long-term hopes here is to really build an intellectual, mentality into science, particularly into the collective intelligence community, with the goal of thinking that doing so will generate more creative research, right? And will really produce better scientists. And it seems like for collective intelligence, this is particularly important because the skills it requires to do collective intelligence, as Jeff was just discussing, it requires integrating ideas from many different fields, many different sources. Requires that breadth. It requires individuals who are more like Isaiah Berlin's foxes than hedgehogs, I would say, or who are hedgehogs, but on a daily basis are foxes. So we need that. I think we really need that intellectual backbone to this. And so one of the motivations for having the speculative fiction creative writing, and Dan Rockmore, who is our editor, is dealing with that, is to the sort of low-hanging fruit is just to get sort of more creative discussion, between humanities and the social and the sciences around this topic. But the second is to sort of just build up this intellectual tradition again and to, incentivize it.